So first off, we accept the Gather Science Data contract and complete it with a command pod, 2 goo containers, and a Kerbin knot. To maximize our science earnings, it helps to do EVA reports on the pad as well as while jumping, since it actually counts as flying. Next, we'll unlock the Engineering 101 science node so that we can use the thermometer to gain some extra science per flight. Then we'll put 2 command pods together along with some goo containers and thermometers, and then take this to take some readings on the runway. Then, after taking some readings, we'll just roll off the runway to gather some science on the KSC biome, as well as the runway. Be careful not to exceed 10 meters per second while rolling, or you might destroy your craft and kill your Kerbin knots, which can be pretty expensive to replace. Now we can unlock the survivability science node, which unlocks the barometer. Then we take our barometer and thermometer back to the launch pad and take readings. Now we have just enough science points for the basic rocketry science node and our first SSTO. Let's accept both the launch first vessel and escape the atmosphere contracts and use a vessel that has the following parts: a command pod, parachute, thermometer, barometer, goo container, make sure that it's centered, 18 FLT 100 fuel tanks, swivel engine, and antenna. Let's also center that as well. Also make sure to empty the monopropellant from the command pod to reduce weight so that it's easier to get into orbit. Now, we just have to take off and record a crew report and get readings from our thermometer and barometer. We don't use the goo container or transmit any science data until we escape the atmosphere, which I'll explain later. And for any of you that are new to KSP, here's my efficient launch profile for this craft. So I full throttle up to 110 meters per second, then pitch over about 2.5 degrees and throttle down until I gain at least 10 meters per second velocity every 100 meters of altitude. Then I keep pitching due east while staying inside the prograde marker, and I want to be leaning about 20 degrees around 6,000 meters and 45 degrees around 14,000 meters altitude. But most importantly, I need at least 400 meters per second of velocity when I'm leaning about 45 degrees. Now when my apoapsis exceeds about 4,000 meters, I throttle down and lean ahead of the prograde marker until my altitude is increasing about as fast as my apoaps, while also being careful to not lean past 90 degrees. Then, I cut throttle when my apoaps is above 71,500 meters. Finally, we can time warp until we're just above the atmosphere at 70,000 meters to complete our first 2 contracts. Now before going any further, we accept the Orbit Kerbin contract and return to our craft. Try to transmit your crew report before circularizing your orbit because the burn will recharge your batteries a little, which is always helpful. Now we circularize the orbit and complete our 3rd contract for our first launch. And since we're in orbit, we now observe our mystery goo container since it gives us more science points in space. Let's return to the KSC and upgrade the astronaut complex so we can perform some EVAs in space for even more science. Then accept the Explore Kerbin contract. Now we record a crew report and EVA report as well as temperature and pressure readings in space. Then we get our Kerbin knot to take the data from the thermometer and barometer so that we can take more readings later in Kerbin's upper atmosphere. Try getting an EVA report over each of the following biomes: shores, waters, mountains, grasslands, highlands, and finally deserts. With that, it's finally time to return home. We time warp until our craft is just about to leave the night side of Kerbin and lower our periapsis to about 45,000. We then take our temperature and pressure readings and an EVA report of Kerbin's upper atmosphere. Now during re-entry, you can maximize drag by rotating your craft to keep it normal to its trajectory, but just be careful not to time warp too much or the craft will burn up or wobble itself apart. Next, we'll use our engine to slow down and keep from shredding our parachute, and then use our last bit of fuel to soften our landing, thus completing our 4th and final contract for our first flight. For the final mission of this video, we'll explore the moon, which simply means we'll fly by the moon and collect science data. I will unlock the general rocketry node so that I can use the Reliant engine on a single stage craft. However, this mission would be much easier if you also unlock the advanced rocketry node and use a dual stage craft with the swivel engine on the first stage and Terrier engine on the second stage. I chose the harder path because I like a challenge, hence the hard mode setting. We'll need 13 FLT 200 fuel tanks to fly by the moon and make it back. And we'll bring along a thermometer, barometer, and antenna to gather extra science during our flight. Make sure your antenna is centered and your command pod is emptied of all monopropellant before launch. Then, we take off and end it with a tilted orbit from horizontal since we have to burn as little fuel as possible, correcting our trajectory. Go ahead and get a crew report from the upper atmosphere and transmit the data right away to make room for more crew reports. Now, to compensate for our tilted orbit, I go to the tracking station and move the camera view until the moon's orbital path looks like it passes right through the same point as when my orbit passes through Kerbin's equator. Then I angle the camera view vertically until I'm looking straight down on Kerbin's north pole, and time warp until the moon is in the top right corner of my screen and my craft is about 6 o'clock with respect to Kerbin. Then I go back to my craft and raise my apoapsis to about 9,500 kilometers. As you time warp toward the moon, make sure to take some instrument readings as well as a crew report and an EVA report in space high above Kerbin. Go ahead and transmit your crew report to make room for another one when flying by the moon. Don't forget to take the data from your instruments when you do your EVA to make room for more readings. When you finally enter the moon's SOI, do the same steps as before, except do not transmit any science data since you need your remaining electric charge to control your craft. Our job is done and we can now return home. You may notice that your periapsis around Kerbin is not where you want it to be, so make a correction as soon as you leave moon's SOI. I like to lower my periapsis to about 50 kilometers since it provides plenty of drag to slow my craft down while not overheating it. I'll fast forward through my air braking process. If you've managed to re-enter above a biome that you haven't flown over yet, then take instrument readings as well as an EVA while both gliding down with your parachute and while on the ground, if possible. Perfect crash landing. Here are the results of this mission. Now let's recap everything we've done so far. First, we completed the Gather Science contract and then used the science we gathered around the KSC to unlock the Engineering 101, Survivability, and Basic Rocketry nodes. Next, we launched our first vessel and escaped to the atmosphere. Then, we accepted the next contract before orbiting Kerbin. We then upgraded the astronaut complex in order to allow us to perform EVAs and gather extra science in orbit before completing the Explore Kerbin contract by returning back to Kerbin. Next, we unlocked the General Rocketry Science node. However, you may want to also unlock the Advanced Rocketry node if you want to make the Moon flyby mission even easier. And lastly, we completed the Explore the Moon contract. Now that's all for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.